Well, good afternoon, everyone. Could be evening, could be morning where you are. I thank you for joining me today. My name is David DuByne, the host for the program. I run the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 channel on YouTube. Today, I'm joined Christian from Ice Age Farmer, who also has that channel on YouTube, Diamond from Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Today, we wanted to spend the next 2 hours talking about what the grand solar minimum is for the first hour, so you can explain to your friends and family. And I hope we have new listeners out there that are listening to this information for the first time. The second hour, we're going to devote to the solutions that you can implement in your life so you can thrive during this time. It's going to be a time of great change for our society, mentally, physically, spiritually. And we're going to have to get ready for this. So today, it's going to be a roundtable discussion with the three of us. We're going to kick off of each other's thoughts. So I'd like to start off the program here, welcoming Christian and also Diamond. Christian?
Well, David, I can't thank you enough for, all the hard work you've done over the last years. I think it's all been admirable. You've absolutely earned your spot on this platform. And so I want to thank you for sharing it out so that we can get this message out there. So I know we're putting this call up against the test lag to Asia and then a satellite internet connection to the mountains of Colorado. So we're going to be doing our best to manage that. But I am honored, absolutely, to be here with both of you. I think highly of both of your work, and I know for a fact that you have inspired many folks and reached many folks already because they've reached out to me and let me know that's I agree, David. I know that there are many of those folks who are here with us tonight that are already familiar with the grand solar minimum. But for those who are just learning about this topic or just tuning into Revolution Radio, I think I'll put this out there to sort of help frame the conversation. Folks, you're about to learn some very important information about how life is going to be changing in the near future. You'll be learning that the natural cycles of the sun, and as a result, the cycles of climate on our planet, are presenting very real and immediate challenges. These are the same sorts of challenges, in fact, that have taken out previous civilizations. And so too will they absolutely change ours significantly. It's for that reason that we're seeing craziness across the board in every area of where we're looking at in the world, every level of awareness, the media, the alt media, everything is completely focused on things that are, it's not that they're not real, but it's not what's most immediate and most real, which is the mounting climate chaos that is writ large around us. And that includes, as a result, the crop losses that are mounting. So my hope for this conversation is that we can impart some of that knowledge, build awareness of what's going on right now, and also, in that process, come away with hope. Diamond, any opening thoughts from you?
Absolutely. I love the disclaimer at the beginning of the radio program. Nothing that you're about to hear is necessarily true. But as far as I'm concerned, Adapt 2030, David, you've done an awesome job with your channel. I followed you from the beginning. Ice Age Farmer, your voice is just as unique and as important in the upcoming shift in society. And I think that the three of us, when we get together, we mind meld really well. And the type of information that we drag out of each other really completes a picture of the disinformation campaign that the media has perpetrated on the masses for decades, and the situation that we're in, which is dire, moving into a climate shift, which, by the way, is not so obscure that the general public can't go read about it. All you have to do is Google Dalton minimum, Maunder minimum, and historical record, and you can read year by year what we're about to experience. And that's what we're going to be talking about, how the past is the key to the future. And with all the modern scientific breakthroughs, and with all of our specialities, I mean, Christian, you've been working on growing in an urban area in a garage, how to use all these alternative growing systems. And David learned about the shift in the climate by trading commodities on the other side of the globe. And I've known about it since the 90s, doing paleoclimatological work in academia. And we're all coming together from different angles, and we all have the same spiritual mindset that there is a solution to the problem. And we're trying to get the word out, because this is something that we need to do together to survive. So these like-minded communities caring for the changes, those are going to be the key to the success in the future. And I'm delighted to be here in the program, and let's get on with it. And that's a boom.
Okay, well, I want you to come at this with what we're going to talk about in the first hour. There are a lot of things going on, and you could just stop at that first hour and go on your day being sad and the world's ending and everything's changing, but that's not the point. The point is, once you know the problem's out there, it's very easy to be an information center for the community around you, people around you, those closest in your neighborhoods or your families, because if you can explain what's going on, the fear goes away instantly, and then you really start to look at the solutions. But instead of looking at a solution that could fulfill 10% of your needs, let's jump that out and go for solutions that can fulfill 10 times the need, because then you really start thinking outside of the box of the possibilities of prior cycles of what happened. History books are your best guide to what's going to happen in this change over the next years. And I mean, it's already started now. We're not waiting for it to begin. It's already begun. It's in flow. It's in motion. This is the first real year of what I would consider amplification that's visible to everybody on the planet. But once you know what's happening, you can really come at it with a solution-based mind frame. And it's all about the sun. And the IPCC has been feeding us that it's you polluting the environment, it's you driving your cars, it's you consuming whatever it is that was produced in a factory, it's your fault all this is changing. But that is absolutely not true. It's not you, it's not CO2, it's the sun. We can map out the cycles of the sun. There's an 11-year solar maximum and an 11-year solar minimum that's on a regular pattern. And if it's an internally combusting star, you need to ask yourself, how does it ebb and flow at such a predictable rate? But then those are smaller cycles, and those are encompassed within larger cycles that are on this 206-year cycle. And then those come in multiples of 2. And then we can start to map this out. And then once you get in the 400-year cycle range, those comes in multiples of 5. We can take it back to 79 AD. And then we start to see repeating patterns all over the place. And it just goes larger cycles and on larger cycles all the way up to the maximum glaciation that's on a 100,000-year cycle. So all the way from a 100,000-year cycle, and then those have grand cycles of 400,000 years, and everything in between can be mappable because you see the periodicity of which it happens, and it's really just science looking back in the past to forecast the future. And there's been so many astrophysicists putting out forecasts of when we are going to begin the downturn. The sun is going to sleep. It's very easy to predict what's happening, but the media doesn't cover most of this. You have to find it on page 27 on a Monday night issue to even find anything about a small crop loss or an extreme snowstorm or snows in the desert. It's just snows in Morocco. It just does not make the mainstream media. They talk about the heat, and that record heat this year, NOAA was caught, and NASA as well, putting record heat where they don't even have temperature stations. They just guess it. And most of the oceans are not covered by temperature data buoys out there anyway, so it's a guesstimate, and they just add in what they want. So there is a purposeful disfeed of information to get you to continue to believe in global warming so they can tax you. But my whole thing coming at it was, why are they not letting us prepare? Why are they keeping us in the dark? Well, first of all, we have to look at what's going on. And Christian, you were tagging on a few events over the last few days and weeks, so I'll leave it with you. Give us some ideas of what's happening with crop losses and weather extremes that we're seeing that match with the grand solar minimum fingerprint.
I can. I have to observe actually that the way you explained that, I mean, A, it was very eloquent, but B, the way that you pictured the workings of the solar system, as it was very beautiful actually, as this elegant timepiece in these multiple layering cycles, I think really helps to reframe this whole conversation as it's not necessarily, it's not that there is this thing called the grand solar minimum, which is a problem. There are natural cycles, and there have always been, and humanity has been through many of them before. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that now we have constructed these infrastructures and these food systems and this civilization, by and large, using very fragile infrastructure and without taking those cycles into consideration. And so we have constructed a system that's doomed to fail. And it is our reliance on that system that is the problem. More so, I think, than the natural cycles. And then, too, David, you hinted that there are there are people working against our finding out what's going on and then getting prepared. Actually, they're working against us in both senses. And I would posit that's sort of the second problem. So one is that we have built up, without taking into consideration this knowledge of cycles, our entire civilization and infrastructure. And then secondly, that there are people working against our collective discovering of that and remedying it. And that's really, I think that's where a lot of the effort needs to be focused right now. But indeed, there are right now signs of the crop losses. I mean, there have been, and your channel has done an excellent job chronicling over the last years these crop losses that aren't in just one area of the world. They're here and there, and they are for different reasons. It's not just that the temperature declined by 0.5 degree across the board, and so here and there were, avocados had to move south a bit. No, it's much more subtle and dangerous. I think that there are, yes, early frosts and late frosts that chip away at the growing season, but there are also these out of season extremes, like the hailstorm we just saw in Tasmania, where the kind of climate that shouldn't even be around in that season is playing out. And these events obviously have effects on the crop production. Agriculture is just not able to cope when there's a sudden frost in the middle of summer. And there are other reasons. Diamond, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was contacted today from someone from Estonia who was telling me about the farming industry in Estonia. Now that's located in the Baltic states, right near Latvia and south of Finland. And they've had 50% crop losses for the last 5 years because of heavy rains during the summer. Also in Denmark, the same thing is happening. It's basically cloudy and raining continuously, which is bad for crops because they require sunlight, some of them, and dry times. And the media is really doing an excellent job not really reporting on the truth of what's happening globally, because in places where the large populations are, the media is controlled by the very multinational conglomerates that are perpetuating this lie. And they don't want mass hysteria. And I think that they're just mitigating it. The disinformation campaign from the beginning is clear. It's been going on for decades. So we have crop losses that are being hidden from the public that are easy to find out if you have communication globally. And they are, like you said, Christian, resulting not from cold necessarily, but also drought and hail. And hail is historic in the Dalton Minimum for causing the food riots in England and subsequent crop losses in 1801 through 1803. Hail up to 18 centimeters. So this is only the beginning. I mean, I've only seen hail 5 and 8 centimeters, so it's going to get bigger. And these freak storms are what causes the crop failures. Everyone wants to know why it's not cold, because it doesn't get cold everywhere. The places it gets cold, it gets very cold. But some places get hot. Many places suffer the worst droughts ever in 200-year cycles, and that results in famine. So now we have to add that on to the obvious misinformation around the cosmic ray increase. We're now at cosmic ray levels that haven't been seen since the early 1900s, soon to be at 1800s levels. And this is going to cause volcanic increase and a cooling of the planet, just like it did back in those times. So that's what we're living right now at this moment. And it's just interesting to see this all play out and how the media is really obfuscating. What do you think there, David?
Well, I'll agree. You know, in the news, at least they've been putting out that Russia had recorded its darkest month ever. They had 6 minutes of sunlight back in December, which was really rare. And this goes in with the reports coming out of Europe as well, that they'd had the least amount of sunlight in the last 100 years. The sunlight has UV in there that kills different kind of molds and fungus that are on our crops. And now we're going to have to start substituting fungicides and just blanketing our crops to try to deal with something that would have been mitigated naturally from our sun's UV. The amount of cloud cover globally, you know, there's all these people talking that warming oceans are evaporating and it's causing more water vapor. But why do they never want to discuss cosmic ray increases? And especially anytime you bring up Heinrich Svensmark's work or the CERN project that verified Svensmark's work, you always just get a gamut of, you know, people coming at you that don't even want to discuss. They just yell instead of discussing. I prefer to compare the information. All right, I just told you something about Svensmark's work and the verification that cosmic rays cause more cloud cover, but they also have the effect of disturbing somehow. There's not really a correlate. They can't figure it out exactly, the mechanism of how the galactic cosmic rays affect the magma to cause more volcanic eruptions, but it's 100% correlation in the grand solar minimum that we get increased volcanism, seismic activity, but they don't want to discuss. It's always yelling. I prefer to discuss when you bring these types of facts out, but without, you know, if there's too much cloud cover, our crops are going to have a very difficult time. They need a certain amount of sunlight. And when I'll just throw out one last little part here, from the research I've done and looking at past cycles, in North America, anything 45 degrees and north and above is going to go offline. And that would be the same with Australia in the southern hemisphere. But when we get over into Europe, anything 55 north and above, because the currents are a little different there and the climate patterns are different. So you can't just draw a single straight line around the globe and say, everything at 45 above. Well, that's really far south in Europe. So anything 55 north and above in Europe, and anything 55 and north and above in Asia, which would include the crop growing areas of Heilongjiang and different places along North Korean border. They're going to be crop losses and people are going to need to import more food. But if, let's say, China has to up its imports by 100 million tons a year, and other places across the planet are experiencing losses, including Australia, United States, Canada, and Europe, where is all this extra import food going to come from? And also the protein content of the wheat and also the actual yield is being decreased at the moment. That's another sticking point. They don't want to talk about it in the ag circles. I mean, when you come on AgWeb and a few other professional sites that are devoted to farmers and farming communities, they talk about it. But in the general media, they don't talk about the quality of the yield coming out is greatly diminished. For example, last year's wheat harvest out of France was of such poor quality that the Egyptians didn't even bid in on it because it was so poor quality that they didn't want it. It's still on the market. It's relegated to animal food, and there is a glut of that type of wheat. So a lot of people point fingers and go, look how much wheat there is in the silos. But I'll point back and say it's not high quality wheat. There's a $2 premium per bushel right now on milling wheat or hard durum wheat or hard winter red. And oats are taking a beating. And all these higher level, oat number one heavy, they're taking a beating as well. So you're starting to see chips away at what we would consider human consumption, high quality yields that, General Mills would buy in to process into a cracker and sell in the store. They're just not getting that quality. They're actually having to add different constituents into their process now just because the natural content of the wheat's no longer there. And these are kind of issues, that go along with crop losses. But what about the yield and the protein content or the nutrition or mineral content within the vegetables or the plants themselves? And Christian, you touched on that before as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And in fact, you were mentioning that you can't just draw a line. And I know there's plenty of farming going on in Croatia, but we had just seen only a few weeks ago when they had a heat wave. Actually, it was a while back. They had a heat wave that decimated their crops there. So even the places we traditionally think of the bread baskets for the surrounding areas, and Spain, there are vegetable shortages there right now that are carrying over to the rest of Europe. And so these are, food is a unique. It's classified as a commodity, and you're exactly right, David, that there are lots of algorithms trading futures that will just go up or down based on the yield numbers. So that's how they play that whole game. But we just saw, like you said, the quality of the wheat isn't there. We just saw out of smallgrains.org yesterday that the 2017 2018 wheat was less nutritive by 26%. That's hard red spring. And that's year over year, building on a downtrend. So you're exactly right to call out that both yield and the quality of crops are descending quite consistently, and I would say concerningly. And the reason that I draw attention to the fact that food is, it's called a commodity on the Chicago Exchange, just like everything else that you can trade. But at the end of the day, you don't want to settle trades in food. You need to eat that food to survive. So it's not entirely fair for economists just to lump this in. There's not exactly price elasticity with respect to how you're going to feed your kids at the end of the day. And so when you see these numbers, these shortages, these yield and quality numbers going down, you really need to take into consideration that the market's reaction to these things is not linear. It's not like other asset classes. It's going to be exponential, and then it's really going to go. And history shows us that as the quality of wheat declines, the price of wheat shoots through the roof almost instantly and becomes unobtainable to the common man. So these are things to bear in mind.
Diamond, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly what I was thinking. As far as how will this unfold? So in the past, the historic food spikes occur a few years into the beginning of the minimum. So we're looking at 2019 for a major spike in grain potentially, with huge crop losses next year because of freak storms. But when that happens, just like Christian said, the price of food becomes unobtainable for the common man, which is everyone. Now, what happens then? Is that when the borders close, the shipping stops, and the wars begin? So you should be thinking about, we have maybe at the most 1 year to prepare to stockpile food for your family and your loved ones in places of security, because when this food spike happens, you're not going to be able to stockpile. It's going to be unattainable. Your entire life savings will get you a year's worth of food. So those are considerations that are upcoming and coming quickly based on historical information. What do you think, Dave?
And then there's another factor that goes right along with that. When the price of your food triples or 5x, you're going to be pulling out of the greater spending economy. And not a lot of people are equating the two together. There's a knock-on effect that knocks on again and again and again through the economy. What happens, we saw in 2008 and 9, the subprime crisis, although the banks had loaned to people who couldn't afford, okay, that was one part of it. But when the fuel prices got so high and people were paying $5 or $6 a gallon in the United States for their fuel, as well as worldwide prices spiked for fuel, people had to pay more. They drew out of this greater spending economy to buy more expensively priced gasoline and diesel fuels. You saw the repercussions of what happened there. It just crashed the economy down into something that was, the media was in damage control to not call it a depression. They were just calling it a heavy recession. Well, whatever, the result was the same, huge downcline in the economy. Okay, now, if that happened, I could carpool with somebody. I could think out of the box and find a different solution to get to work. I could find a different solution to go shopping. I didn't have to drive. I could, Ride a bike, walk, get some exercise, think of it as my workout when I walk 3 miles to the store and carried something back in a backpack just for exercise. Okay, there's a lot of solutions to not using fuel in a car and thinking of other ways to be mobile without having to consume fuel and spend that cost. The difference is this time, everybody eats every day. You cannot. This is the only thing that scares central banks anyway, is food price rises. It's completely out of their control. They can do everything else to try to push, yields down and control the economy, but food is the only thing they cannot control. And when the food price spikes get up to 5 times, the economy is going to crash and be extremely limited. And this is what really brought me in to the grand solar minimum, was knowing about smart contracts for food delivery using cryptocurrency. Now, I know a lot of people are very anti-crypto, but if the world's economies are in a tumultuous state, and I don't know if your country's central bank or your country's government's going to be in place when I send a ship of 60,000 tons of wheat across the ocean, I need to be guaranteed payment, because food is going to be the most expensive, most precious commodity on the planet. I'm going to have to make sure that I get paid for that. So locking it in a smart contract, and we can base our payment on Ethereum, we could do Bitcoin, we could do Verge, Digibyte, whatever we decide as the payment medium in a cryptocurrency. It doesn't matter if national sovereign governments are operating or not, because crypto is far outside that as a payment mechanism and medium to agree on value for whatever product it is. And these all kind of dovetail together. But you got to think about the economy too. Well, what if your job just disappears because there's no more orders coming in? Supermarkets are going to do great during this time. Fertilizer companies, anything associated with farming, vertical farming, instrumentation involved in farming, they're going to have a heyday. This is going to be the golden age for them. But, TVs, new consumables, these things, new TVs, new phones, these companies are going to find themselves in a dire position as well, and look for downturns in the economy, look for downturns in currency. And what if people can't afford the food? The crime rate's going to skyrocket. And we see that routinely. There's 3 things that you can count on in a grand solar minimum: crop losses, population migration, crime increases. And again, the wars could start, the violence, I should say, associated with that. When people can't buy, they're going to get that at any means necessary. If your children are starving, you're going to have to make difficult choices to feed them. Or, not you per se, maybe you have enough means, but other people are completely unprepared. I think there's like 48 million people in the United States that are on food assistance at the moment. What happens if those basic necessities cannot be met through the food assistance program in the United States? What happens then? These are all the trickle down effects that people, really need to start discussing and finding for like 2 weeks ago, not today. We're way behind the ball on this, Christian.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's called for food, it's called an economic substitute, when you can go get some other good if you run out of the first good. And that's exactly right to say there simply is no economic substitute for food. And I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned, that this will be the heyday, the golden age, if you will, of vertical farming, because I think this leads to something that is actually very informative. We've spoken so far in this conversation about the signs, both in history of these things happening before and that we are seeing now, that tell us that we are entering the cycle again. But as well, I think there is activity by the folks that are running these systems that is a tell, that gives us insight into what they know also is happening. And in this case, I'm referring to the fact that the billionaires, in fact, by far the majority of billionaires on this planet, are investing heavily over the last almost 2 years now in indoor vertical farms, in alternative meat. We just saw, I think 2 days ago, Bill Gates started investing, or announced that he was funding the development of a GMO cow, which would be a hardier cow that gave more milk and required less food. They are actively, very aggressively funding and starting companies, across Silicon Valley with this open mission statement. It's not even a secret. The mission statement of Plenty.ag, one such startup, is literally, we are creating a new form of agriculture. And so when you see Eric Schmidt of the former CEO of Google, and Jeff Bezos, CEO, founder of Amazon, and Carlos Slim, and all these billionaires throwing their money into these operations that are designed to create a new form of agriculture, I think that begs the question, what's happening to the existing form of agriculture? And that is what we're answering in this conversation. That is where this question finds its answer. Don't you think, David?
Diamond, you want to take that?
Well, I can see a boon in these new types of technological upstarts in indoor farming. As a matter of fact, one of my subscribers wants to buy into a company that is started in Philadelphia. They started up right when I left about 4 years ago, and they are one of the top installers of these really high-tech vertical indoor grow systems. I knew nothing about them. Their entire startup was since I left to start the project out here, my homestead. I think is that there is going to be a major geologic catastrophe on the planet that causes instantaneous global unrest. Don't have many years, one or two, of economic decline to actually witness. So I think that it's now around 55% is my probability that there will be a major volcanic eruption coupled with an earthquake that will instill fear into the masses, and it will begin the bombing sprees. It will end the work cycle, and the chaos will begin. And that's in the near future. And I'm saying 55% in the next 2 years. So if those companies can have an upstart in 2 years and get stuff rolling and roll that out, that will be helpful to survival. But I don't think we have a lot of time. And in that 2-year time frame, I think that the fiat currency markets are all going to quickly rise up next year and all implode as all the fiat gets shifted into cryptocurrency, because I'm watching it right now. And it's a good way to make a lot of money to buy the supplies you need to survive. So it's a great investment opportunity for the next several years, so that you can benefit from the boon and stockpile on the supplies that you're going to need. But I think it's going to be a geologic catastrophe that starts the global unrest and chaos. And that will happen when you wake up one day. David?
Staying on the crypto, the developers of a new ICO called Montis, MONTIS.io, their offering is going to be around 10-acre greenhouses with aquaponic facilities that they are getting funding for 5 different facilities. And they've chosen 15 degrees north latitude area to have their grow units going out. And this is another thing. They're trying to come into the areas where they're not getting such ferocious hailstorms, where they're out of the hurricane, typhoon, cyclone belt, and in non-geologically active areas. So they've chosen very carefully where they want to put these ideas. But you can see this huge momentum into food growth and alternative growing systems that we really need to shift, and we are shifting now, agriculture. Financial track records, if you take a look at where the billionaires are, they've been very successful manifesting, wealth and goods on this planet. They're pretty much in that state of continuous manifestation. So where they're going with their minds is where the rest of the world's going to lead. And if they're jumping out there ahead of the pack, you need to start to ask yourself, why are they going there when they're telling us to just keep shopping at supermarkets? And it brings me to the point of the Chinese. They have meticulous records going back thousands of years about climatic changes. During the Silk Road, they had perfect records of what was going on in China, in each area of China, and then what was happening over in Turkey at the same time. So they were having different areas. They had the South Silk Road, which not a lot of you are familiar with, but it goes through Myanmar, down through India, and then it reconnects up in the Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan area. But then they had the regular traditional Silk Road, which are used to with all the palaces and camels going through the deserts and that sort of stuff out through Xinjiang. They know what's happening with the climate. Zheng He, he sailed all the way over to Eastern Africa. They thought another grand solar minimum was starting, because every grand solar minimum, the Chinese dynasties get wiped out. The mandate from heaven from the emperor disappears because they can't feed their people. So let's shift to modern day. They have thousands of years of records. They know everything from Africa, from Turkey, all the way over to China. They have that whole area of Asia, Central Asia, and parts of Europe mapped out with Africa during at least the last 5 grand solar minimums. So they surely know what's happening. And lo and behold, they've set up the String of Pearls. That is a series of ports going from Africa back to Jiangsu in Myanmar that has a direct rail connection right over into Yunnan province. Instead of going down through the Malacca Straits over to Shanghai to unload, they just unload in Jiangsu, and it's 100 miles, 150 miles going straight up into Kunming. They cross the border, Rayleigh, and then they just continue right up to Kunming. They're also building rail lines straight into the middle of what's considered barren desert today out in Africa. And when you start to look at Central Africa, going up North Africa into the desert areas of the Sahel, investment is the #1 investment play in Africa. They're building hospitals, roads, factories, housing, but they have these rail lines going out literally into the middle of the deserts. But when you look back in history, and we're starting to see now there's more rainfall there suddenly. So what did they know about the future climate changes and where food will be growable? Because if they lose their 55 and north and above growing regions of, Heilongjiang and that whole area, they're going to have a secondary supply source coming out of Africa. And the Africans are with them because they've been so generous to give them hospitals, doctors, schools, all these things that the West just has not given them. And they look at the Chinese as the saviors of their continent because they have put so much in there. And there's so many jobs created, but they are setting up for the deserts to start greening to be major grain growing belts on the planet. Not this week, maybe not next week, but we need to look out in the future, maybe 4 or 5, 6 years, and you can start to see gargantuan changes coming. And if you look back through history, thousands of years, not just 20 or 40 years of the satellite record. We can look back thousands of years and see how it's reoccurring in the cycle. Christian?
I'm just really grateful. That's such valuable intel, and I'm glad you're bringing it to the table here. I think, those are some of the clearest signs, I think, of, I guess, what Richard Dolan terms the breakaway civilization, or we can call it the cryptocracy. These hidden rulers that are pulling the strings behind the scenes here, making arrangements for the collapse of agriculture, for these massive geological scale changes on our planet that we know are underway, but certainly don't see governments of in the West taking steps to inform, let alone prepare the population. So it's really telling. The only thing that we know that's been going on here is the massive construction of the deep underground military bases, and we do know from those that they were scheduled to be completed by 2012. So I think if we continue this thread of looking at those actions and trying to infer more about what's going on right now, based on what they're doing, then I think that might speak to sort of, and this is what Diamond was starting to hint at, and I think we should actually hit more in this first hour, is that there is both this long tail of things changing in a gradual, slow way, and sort of the long game there. But there is too, and we need to acknowledge this, the possibility that there is an immediate, splash of ice age water to the face, or the Zen slap, right? Where whether it's one of these plasma filaments that pops off from the sun, or a massive volcanic and seismic event that just changes things everywhere on this planet, so that people are in a totally different mind state, and the security on the streets is lost. I think it's not that, it's definitely not fun to think about, but it's important to acknowledge that this is a possibility right now. You want to speak more about that, Diamond?
Yeah, well, I do. And let me start with the greening of the deserts and the China power play and buying up all of North Central Africa. The greening of the desert started last year, and it was reported in North America when the deserts in California bloomed for the first time in 80 years. And that's a cycle. And then the next part of the cycle is the desert in Arizona blooms, and then the northern Mexican desert, which extends into Arizona, will bloom. So when that happens, the northern Sahara will bloom. And the forecast is for 3 to 6 feet more snow in the next 7 days in central Morocco, in central and southern Morocco, which again is unprecedented, but not during this catastrophic climate shift, which is happening now. And the powers that be have been aware of it since 2012 or earlier and are already prepared. The missing $6 billion paid for that and many other things, which are not even talked about in the mainstream. It's as if the information is hiding in plain sight, and the brainwashing is so complete that billions of people can't see it right in front of them. And I know you have something to say about this, David.
Well, I'd like to touch on what Christian and what we talked about in our last conversation with David LaPointe in the primer fields of our sun, talking about the electric universe and really the nature of our star and our galaxy and the universe itself in the third dimensional time space as we understand it. You know, everything around us is 99.999% plasma. And within that plasma field, there's different densities, and you'll find where star clusters start to form. It's right along these same fields, what they called field-aligned currents or Birkeland currents. But we're also in here, and this affects our star, and this is really, well, the sun, if you want to, it's a star. It's our star, our local star, the sun. And how it really goes through these cycles. It's an electrical nature of our star, and this is what really turns it on and turns it off and sends it into these 400-year cycles, 2,000-year cycles. I mean, what ushers on the ice ages and what brings us out of them? You know, there's planetary orbit geometry involved in Milankovitch cycles and these types of things, but it's really the current flow over our star into a pinch that ignites it into, you get into this higher activity state, glow mode, or it goes into a more decreased state that turns it off when we get into this grand solar minimum, or in the very depths of it, you go into a full-blown ice age. But it's all electrical in nature. And Christian, I'd like you to touch on that because you were the one who brought it up yesterday.
I mean, that's exactly right. I think David LaPointe's work, and there are some, frankly, they're beautiful videos. You can just watch someone manipulate plasma fields with magnets, and it's fascinating, but it is also very insightful as to the way that our sun works. And I think you were right to call out the electric universe model, that there's a lot of value here, and I think it's because it's an accurate one in understanding the way that our solar system is working. Certainly, we see when we look at the planetary scale scarring, these deep chasms on Mars, there are interactions in our solar systems at a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. Evidence that the sorts of things that LaPointe is creating with his lab scale fields there do indeed play out on the massive solar system scale as well. And so the idea that our sun could be going through these sort of like a candle flickering before it is extinguished, sort of flickering before it's going to transition into this low state is, it's certainly an interesting and I think frightening one, but it's also worth considering along with the, I think you've done some great videos displaying the signs that are on cave drawings and all sorts of ancient, in fact, they're encoded into the symbology of many ancient wisdom traditions and religious texts and these sorts of things, that these signs that one posits were seen in the sky along or before, immediately before the great cataclysms of ancient times. And so they were encoded into these cave wall dwellings as warnings to us now. And so when we see like the Norway spiral or these other interesting signs that are very familiar to us, and they're familiar to us because they have been so deeply encoded into the collective consciousness and so readily replicated into belief systems and religious iconographies and symbologies, so that now, when we see them again, they resonate deeply with us and they inspire us to search for answers. And I think the answers are these conversations that we're having right now.
Diamond,
Yeah,
I know,
plasma
I know you
physics.
have something
Let's
to
talk
fill
about
in
the
there with further longer time frames of proxies that we can find on Earth that actually verify what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, let's just dive right into the petroglyphs. Up until the early 2000s, there was a whole group of petroglyphs worldwide that were called unknown. And at the work right here by where the homestead is in Los Alamos Laboratory, Anthony Peratt was able to replicate the entire cacophony of unexplained petroglyphs. Now, he did this without knowing about the petroglyphs' existence. And it was just a chance encounter with Dave Talbot that they put the pieces together and said, oh my goodness, ancient man looked at plasma discharge effects in the sky and they were recording it on the rock. Now, what that means for our future, just like we've been discussing, the past is the key to the future, that those events will probably be happening in the future. And now let's talk about the electric universe, the Z-pinch, and our cold. The sun is not an internal combustion star that's running out of energy. It's simply a node in an intergalactic web of energy. And our little node has a heartbeat, and some mathematicians deciphered that heartbeat, and that's Zarkova et al. And that heartbeat is just one piece of the puzzle, because the GISP-2 and the Antarctic cores clearly show us a whole nother cosmogenic level of forcing. And we're talking at the Milankovitch scale, which is the precession of the equinoxes, which according to the Vedas, rises and falls human consciousness through a long cyclic progression. And luckily, we're getting higher in spiritual consciousness as we move into the Ice Age. Now, the precession of the equinoxes is then altered. The position of that orbit around the sun, maximum eccentricity, is more or less oblique and more or less eccentric in a 40 and 100,000 year cycle. And it just so happens that as we descend into this grand solar minimum, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation is also descending. The Pacific decadal oscillation is also descending, and we are descending into the maximum eccentricity of the Milankovitch cycle in 2024. And all these additive effects are all hitting at once while the magnetosphere of the Earth is waning. And the work of Rolf Wishy, he shows through the Ulysses spacecraft data a clear linear regression of solar wind that will hit zero sometime in 2035. Now, what does that mean with the primer field when it shuts off? Does it send out a huge EMP? Is the grid failure epic? Is that the Stone Age moment? Will we even have at that point? Will there already be massive volcanic events that cause the population to be decreased by 90% by then? These are all the questions that everyone listening wants answered, and no one has answers to them. But you can be assured that in the next 3 decades, the events that will unfold will be epic, biblical, and a complete reset of society as you know.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on the primer field collapse. Okay, we're in an electromagnetic universe, and that star that's next to us called the sun has the greatest electrical magnetic influence on our planet as well as other planets going out into, Saturn and the outer planets, Jupiter. But what's going to happen when we get into this phase state change is that is going to have a differential equilibrium as well on our atmosphere. I mean, our planet and our atmosphere are 2 different charges. They're going to have to equalize state. That is only so when we take a look at the electrical ferocity of the storms coming right now, that is nothing more than an equilibrium between phase state changes on our sun, equalizing with what's coming down on our poles and what's happening with our Earth itself. So the amount of you're looking at Steve, that electrical plasma arc that came through that has only been seen once, and then it was seen twice, and then it was seen 3 times. Now, wait, you're telling me that something that's never been seen before and that we just named 2 years ago, because it was the first time it had ever been seen, occurs twice more in our skies? This is a plasma arc that was photographed that came off. This borders on what the ancients talked about, plasma bolts coming from the skies. So as our sun starts to continue in its phase state change and decreasing as we get more into the depths and our sun goes even more to sleep, we're going to start to see this differential between the electrical bounds of space and our Earth. They're two different charges. They're going to equalize. And what about the fire-breathing dragons? You know, this has been encoded forever in all cultures. Fire-breathing dragons. We don't have any dragon fossils that we found on this planet so far. Maybe we have, maybe they're hidden, who knows. But anyway, traditionally, we have not found dragon fossils that are on a display in a museum anywhere. Which begs to question, if this is so ingrained in every culture when they're talking about fire-breathing dragons, are they talking about plasma discharges from space onto the planet that everybody witnessed? Are they talking about plasma arcing between planets, scarring on Mars? You know, is Saturn going to reignite? Is Jupiter going to glow mode again as our sun goes into a low state? There's got to be equilibrium. Are these other outer planets that were trying to be stars, are they going to ignite and go into glow mode themselves? And then the heliosphere will compress in on that because the center of what we consider our electrical solar system will change. You know, this is what ancients were talking about. There's so much information in the ancient records. And Christian, I'll let you go with that because you're really deep into it.
That is definitely deep into it. I think, I mean, these are all really important questions and good points. I think the only thing we can say for certain when we consider them is that the idea of uniformitarianism, right? The idea that the solar system is this static machine, like the model you see in the classroom where you just turn the gears and the planets move at their rates and that's it. That's the way it is. And that's the way it will always be. That idea is clearly completely ridiculous. It's completely a myth. Our system seems to be in a constant state of flux. And I think that makes life on this planet much more interesting. And probably dangerous. I think one thing that we didn't call out that I want to include in this first hour is the changes in the output of the sun. So the shifts in the quality of UV light. And then also, and this is a different kind of, you know, we've sort of been exploring these black swan ways that things could be more immediately drawn to a problematic state where we reach a problem where things change more quickly than sort of the slow burn entering the grand solar minimum. And seeing that the insect biomass, you know, there was a German study that I want to reference here that indicated the flying insect, I should say, biomass had dropped by 75%. And if that's the case, then that alone constitutes a real crisis of agriculture here, where there are suddenly, you know, 3 out of 4 pollinators are no longer in the skies doing their job and making our agriculture fertile. So these are the sorts of things. And another example that I like, because it's just so esoteric, was the snow cover in Pacific Northwest that gave
Christian,
rise to an
I'm going to have to stop you here. We're going for a little break. We'll come back the second hour to talk more about the solutions in the grand solar minimum. I'm David DuByne from Adapt 2030. I have with me Christian from Ice Age Farmer and Diamond from Oppenheimer Ranch Project. And we will be back just after this short break. See you then.
Boom!
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to our second hour. I'm David DuByne from Adapt 2030. I have with me Christian, Ice Age Farmer, and Diamond from Oppenheimer Ranch Project. Now, Christian, you were with your last thought there before we went to the break, like you continued that. You were talking about California and also signs in the skies of checking out more meteors that are coming through our atmosphere now. Just a lot of signs in the skies as well. And can you continue with your thought?
Yeah, I was actually going to reference, thanks, David, just the way that there are these secondary and tertiary effects of things that are not really, in fact, they are nigh impossible to really predict what's going to happen. And one example that I'm fond of, because it's just so, it's kind of esoteric, and it illustrates what I'm trying to show there, is after a particularly wet winter, and one where there was a lot of snow cover in the Pacific Northwest, there was, as a result, a preponderance of these beetles that, they were able to reproduce much more readily than usual because of this unusual long snow cover. And the way that they then decimated crops, and even there were lots of car accidents because there were simply so many beetles that they formed a slick across the road. And so the crops were being eaten by these beetles, and the trucks that were there to pick up the food wasn't able to get through. I mean, it was just this cascading series of failures, which I think is very illustrative of the way that things can spin out of control when you look a little more deeply at the infrastructure and the just-in-time delivery systems upon which the vast majority of people on this planet, right into the way that rely to eat our every meal. And so stepping back a little bit as we enter the second hour, I just want to appreciate that these are difficult things to hear and to really integrate. I want people to be able to integrate this into the way that they're living their life, because it's easy for us to listen. I think this is especially true in the truth community. It's really easy to listen to, there are $17 trillion missing from over there and 7 billion bullets over there, and these numbers and these statistics and these different things that are all extremely concerning, and then on to the next one. But I've tried to be very deliberate in enunciating that tonight we're talking about figures that don't come from some government office or some, these are cycles and occurrences that are very real and that are happening right now, undeniably. Where would you take that, David?
Diamond, I'll let you hit on that. I want to keep it going because Diamond, you were talking about some of the protection mechanisms. You talked about the giant hail, 18-centimeter hail. I saw your video where you talked about Lewis and Clark doing their explorations, and those hailstones were so large that when they hit the ground, they bounced up 20 feet back up into the air, and people were hurt all over the place, and they were trying to run from these storms, literally run from the storms. And then you'll see why all of these dolmens, these stone structures across our planet were built. I mean, when we come into what we look at ancient times and even more modern times, 18-centimeter hail or something that's 6 inches around coming out of the sky that's bouncing 20 feet when it hits the ground. How do we even protect greenhouses, and how do we protect infrastructure from this? Are we going to have to put things in caves with lights? I mean, people lived in caves for a reason. Our human capacity of our mind to build structures like we would today existed back then. We have the same brain capacity as we did 10,000, 20,000 years ago. But why didn't people build? They always built stone. Why did they build stone? What were they hiding from? And Diamond, could you pick up on that?
Well, yeah, let me just quick touch on the insect topic that Christian put up, and then I'll get right to the Anasazi here and their cliff dwellings. So as far as the study that was taken there in Germany that showed the massive decline in the biome and the insect loss, I just want to ensure the public that as far as the fossil record is concerned, insects have been resilient on the planet for 340 million years, peaking 200 million years ago. And insects are not to blame for the losses, nor is the grand solar minimum or cosmic radiation. It's man. The same with colony collapse disorder and the bees. Multinational corporations, which are destroying the planet, are creating a cocktail of nightmares called neonicotinoids and other pesticides, which are killing the biome. The low residence times, they retain in the soil, and everything is sick, just like the human population is being sickened with fluoride, preservatives, and GMOs. So that being said, and getting back to the universe and native thought processes and the Mother Earth and Gaia, I believe that the etheric record, our DNA, the energetic vibration of the universe, this heartbeat of the sun is to eliminate problems like man's problem right now, which is himself, of destroying life. So these resets occur regularly to put the ego back in its place and to return man back to the land, because we are truly creatures of the stars. We are made from stardust. We are the earth. We are grounded on the surface. We are part of the planet's biome. So these types of resets, I believe, we know very little about. And I think that the cosmos itself is a neural network, a consciousness that is taking care of the problem on its own. And those of us that realize it, like the three of us that are having this conversation, are the solution. And the solution is that to take the next group of survivors on, it has been done time immemorial as each civilization has been destroyed. Now, the last few grand minima, the Dalton and the mini ice age and the fall of others, those are minor compared to the shift that we're experiencing in this particular grand minima. This grand minima, we are not going to come out of in 75 years and be sitting on the beach in rosy times. There will be, but they will not be, there will not be hotels you're paying for. So I think we should talk about some of the solutions, and we should get into it, because there are many ways you can set yourself up for abundance in the coming times. And that is start.
Yeah, if I can just jump in there, I think Diamond, you're exactly right, and you're hinting at what I had said earlier in the show. At the problem, when you really look deeply at the problem, it's not necessarily the natural cycles as much as it is us and the way we're living right now. And so when you start to, in fact, if we sort of set as a guiding light for this second part of the conversation, the acceptance that the system that we have built to feed people on Earth and our infrastructure right now is fragile, and it's poorly designed, and it is actively failing. And so the theme here should be the construction of new, more resilient systems. And I think it's not a new path, really, that we have to find. The more I, in fact, learn, the more I realize that it is a return to the way that we've always lived, a return to simplicity and to living in harmony with nature. And so I think there's a lot of hope just from that realization. And also, it really points the light right at what the solutions are, right? When we look at concepts like biomimicry, i.e. taking the way that nature works in nature, out in the wild, and then trying to use those sets of behaviors in a way that actually is a productive system, right? So something like an agroforestry approach to, hey, it looks like in nature, there are trees in fields of things. And so maybe this whole idea of just having monoculture, fields of only whatever wheat, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we should combine trees every once in a while, and then around them these layers. And the food forest concept that comes from permaculture is an example of this concept, biomimicry, where we're just going to create our own systems, but this time let us model them after the way that nature does it, because nature is what has stood and will continue to stand the test of time. And so if we have the presence of mind, even in these immediately pressing times, to adjust our thinking and to follow that course of action, I think it's actually delightful. We find that the solutions start presenting themselves to you rather than this enumerating a list of problems and then trying to solve each one off. And that's actually more difficult to do because you're just attacking these heads of the Hydra, where a more holistic solution actually takes into consideration that when you've got a homestead running, the output of the chickens, and I guess let me start over there. Part of what happens when you move your thinking towards the way that nature works is that you stop thinking of yourself as like this dude that walks around and has to eat every once in a while. And in fact, Diamond hit on this. You start to see yourself as a part of this living web of all of these cycles of energy and water and nitrogen and carbon and all of these things that we are inseparably a part of. And that realization brings you closer to this manner of thinking where, okay, if the output from the chicken it makes great manure, and I can use that to grow this. And you start to see the circle of life working as it does, again, out in nature, but now replicated in a small scale on your homestead, fueling your family. And that, I think, is the direction that we need to be thinking. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, let's go from the micro to the macro. And when you're talking about taking your own individual power back, knowledge is your power. Because if you know that you can find something in the forest that you can eat, a vegetable source, I mean, how many of you listening can walk out to a forest near you, maybe in your backyard if you're bordering on a forest, and how many of you can forage and find something just literally walking through? The Native American Indians had set up forests to be walk-through gardens. How many of you have that skill to know what's around you that can be used as a food source? And what if you're the one that knows that and then other people are terrified, and then you can teach that skill to others? And instead of you yourself, now you have other people that you've taught, and this is the way that the information gets dispersed. And that whole community or group of people around you, we don't know what they know until you ask the questions. And once you ask the questions, we can start to find what people really know about what you're talking about. Integrating systems together, who knows how to do the gardening, and instead of using pesticides on your garden, what types of plants can be grown next to each other as natural repellents? Which one of those are the healthiest? Which one of those can be grown for natural medicines? You know, during this just-in-time delivery, you absolutely are going to see a breakdown in delivery of medicines. And one of the think tanks I talk to, they absolutely see the older generation, the people over 70 years old, is the first to die off during this change if there is a loss in any distribution of the medicines. But what happens if you know how to grow a natural plant that can substitute for that? You know, something with cholesterol, something with, an antibiotic, these things that might just disappear from the stores because of the fragile delivery system. Well, what if you can replicate that in a natural fashion, which we've been so dissuaded from left, right, and center? You can't even talk about using homeopathy or anything without getting in trouble with the FDA or some type of government institution. Oh, you're trying to practice medicine without being a doctor. No, I'm just saying boil marigolds, the heads of marigold plants, and distill that down, and you have an antibiotic. Not taking your own picture, that's all I'm saying. But oh no, you have to buy this antibiotic in a store. So talking about taking your own personal power back, what do you know around you in your own environment, literally next to your house or very close to you? You can walk, you can ride a bike to. Find something nutritious. Or how many of you know how to plant gardens? Because that is the way it's going to go. We are going to come back to the self-sufficiency state where, like Kristen, you have your project going on, Diamond, you as well. Like you're in a community that's sharing and getting together and working together, so you know each other's strengths and weaknesses and what that person's specialized in. And what if you can specialize in growing a certain plant that then could be disseminated through the community? These are the types of solutions that can be implemented instantly. It's not about you even have to go buy anything. It's in your mind already. And I mean, how much is it going to cost you to walk through the forest with a guidebook and look for things that you can eat? New shoots, new spring leaves coming off of plants, natural root herbs or natural root things, that edibles that are out there, mushrooms. There's a whole gamut of things that could be used.
Yeah, let me just speak to the wild edibles real quick, and to the people listening out there that feel like they have no hope because they have nowhere to begin. Now, what's happened in the last 5 or 10 years all across the globe, there are groups that have popped up that are wild edibles groups. And if you live near a city, small town, there's a wild edibles group near you. Just Google your area for your local wild edibles group. We had 1,000 members, and we would go out into Fairmount Park and learn how to survive on the wild food in that area. They're all, because who you will meet there are the people that you want to know moving forward. So by changing your thinking and using the technology before it all goes away, because this technology will evaporate and will not exist in the near future, you can actually benefit from the so I suggest everyone get involved into a local wild edibles group, buy the book, Eat the Weeds, and just start learning about what's growing in your backyard, because you can survive on wild food forever if it exists. And another thing I wanted to hint on was start learning about growing. Biomimicry, Christian was discussing, but look into the permaculture principles. These principles are the way that we are going to have to live in the future. And they basically are using forest systems to create all systems, because the earth has been a perfect system. It creates no waste. It uses everything in a perfect biodynamic system. The technology culture that we're living in is a disgusting, dilapidated, antiquated nightmare. It cannot go on any longer, and the universe is ending it. That's what's happening. This type of blatant disregard for life on Earth, with the amount of pollution we've been pumping on the surface of it, the planet is going to react, and it's going to killing it. And we have seen this in the Sahel Desert. There are groups of trees that have the ability to kill mammals that overgraze them through communication. We do not know anything about the world around us, but the world around us knows everything about us, and it's taking care of the problem. Those that want to survive have to learn how to live in harmony with nature. So start by going outside, getting a wild edibles group near you, and start meeting the people that know the information that you need to know. Surround yourself with like-minded people, and you will live in abundance. There are people with small-scale farms all over the world. The Worldwide Organization of Organics for Free Farms, or wolfing. Become a member of that. You can stay on organic farms all over the world every 10 miles for free in exchange for you helping out. You get to learn how to food, you get to eat their food for free, and you get to learn how to be self-reliant. And that's a heads up. Back to you.
That is a heads up, and it's a helpful one. Thanks, because it's important to. I mean, yeah, when you're just coming to this awareness and you're thinking, how do I possibly begin down this path? It's not something that has been completely forgotten, right? A lot of pop culture certainly would love for you to believe that no one lives in these self-sufficient ways anymore. But these things have been kept alive by people, and there has, as Diamond was just stating, been a resurgence, a return to these, and you can find them under many different names: the permaculture name, the rewilding name, the eat the weeds. There are probably near you valuing and practicing and keeping these skills alive. And yes, surrounding yourself with people that have these skills is the way to attain them. And yeah, I couldn't agree more, David. Like, getting this knowledge is really the prime method of preparation. And I think your example there was pretty illustrative. We could spend a lot of time and an enormous amount of resources trying to construct a building that's going to grow food and retain heat and do this and that, and it's going to recycle gray water systems, but it's, and then we have basketball-sized hail come through the next day, and all of it is put to shame. And so the wiser course of action isn't to try and buy your way out of the problem. It's to acquire the skills, because the way to prepare the solution for the basketball-sized hail is not a bulletproof bunker, right? It's the solution is to be so confident, so capable in your ability to construct a new structure that it really isn't the end of the world if the hail demolishes your current one. You can move to where, in fact, maybe you'd spotted a better place with a creek the week before. You can take that into consideration and just roll with the punches. But it's the knowledge that will give you the psychological wherewithal to tolerate the kinds of blows we'll be enduring over these coming years. What do you think, David?
Well, again, reaching out to people in your local community who knows plants best. Nursery owners. So how many of you have been down to your local nursery just to talk to the owners of your nursery? What plants are they growing there? What fruit trees, what herbs, what grows really well in your area? They're so well versed in what's going on. And nursery owners, they're out every day. They know what the weather changes are. They can see cycles. They can see, it's getting wetter. The Farmer's Almanac, it's going to do this. So you might want to shift to this crop for this year. And if you want to start off with something that's incredibly easy, sprouting. I mean, this would be a first step into getting your own food source grown, sprouting seeds. That way you can be more familiar with what types of seeds there are, how long it takes to germinate them before you can eat them. Most times you buy these in a store, you get them on a salad in a restaurant. Well, those were grown somewhere. And if you have the ability to sprout, if you can find a seed source, you're able to sprout those. And another great thing beyond just eating them, once you sprout them, you can then plant those seeds because they already have a head start. So their maturation is probably around 80%, but whatever you plant in there versus just putting a seed in the ground and hoping it will grow out. If you sprout it first and it grows out to, an inch too tall, then you can replant that somewhere else. So there's all these little solutions. If you want to start with the baby steps, go right ahead. And I really am a fan of sprouting myself. So it's just these little solutions. It's not, trying to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. It's already things that are known how to do. And just playing with it, learning it, testing it, see what goes right, what goes wrong. Is it too humid? Did something get fungusy or little? Did you get mold growing on the bottom of your tray? Why did that happen? And then you can try to experiment from there. I'll let it go.
I'd like to bring up tiny homes real quick because Christian was alluding to nomadic lifestyles in the future. You could just pick up and move. That'd be great if you had a tiny home and a method to move it with. But in the beginning, for moving around from safe area to safe area, being able to take your whole family and all your belongings on the back of your vehicle real quick to escape into a real rural setting for safety could be a thing that is important in the future, which is why we're starting a tiny home manufacturing facility here, because we believe that in the next year or so, lots of people are going to want to change to that things type of lifestyle where they can move around until they figure out where they want to be, where they have the best stream, the best weather, and the best growing and all the best things, the best wild food, the best wild game. These are ways that we used to think. And just like Christian alluded to, they're coming back into fancy. So if you haven't searched the resources, do it now and start buying books and stockpiling information. You don't have to learn everything right now, but you have to have a box of the books with the information in it so you can go get it in the future when there's no more Google. These are ways we used to think and we don't think now. Proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. I always say it. It's hard to say it. But start stockpiling knowledge because knowledge is power. And I'll throw that.
That is hard to say, but it's absolutely true. Yeah, and I think I'm inclined to disagree a little bit about just throwing everything into a box. I do think that's a great idea. We need to have offline copies of this knowledge, and I would agree that there's too much of it to try and absorb all at once. But more importantly, I'm going to say I think people do need to start today. I think even just growing some microgreens or doing some sprouting gets you that exposure to the whole process of seeing a seed grow, and then necessarily you're going to want to eat these things, and that starts to move your diet in the right direction towards things that you can eat, things that you can grow yourself. And to that point, I want to sort of illustrate there or just draw attention to the fact that it's not, a lot of people think, I could never grow everything I eat, but they're going about their lives and eating Big Macs and things that it's not possible to replace that with things that you grow at home. And so there's necessarily a part of this that is meeting yourself halfway, which means I'm confident that I can get there, and I'm going to start changing my diet also in ways that make it easier for me to get there. So if I like to eat a breakfast that's on cereal, but I can't grow a ton of wheat, then maybe a bed of microgreens would prove to be a better, a bowl of microgreens in the morning. And I actually like a bowl of microgreens in the morning. I think it's pretty tasty, and it gets some nice living green energy and enzymes in you. And in fact, I think gaining a working understanding, both because, as we've said, there will not be necessarily the kind of medical support system that we're used to right now in the future, but also just because this is our body, this is our human body, and we have to be responsible for keeping ourselves running well. And so getting up to speed on the kinds of diets that, primal and paleo sorts of diets that people used historically, both because, there are reasons that the diet is what people ate in prehistoric times, and that's because it's what's available to them. And so you can't just change your diet overnight from freeze-dried carbs into, living greens and grass-fed things. I think this is something that you're going to need to work with your body as you develop your skills. And so it's important to do these things at the same time. There's one other thing that I think is an often overlooked area on in terms of growing in the garden or on the homestead or anywhere really, and that's the role of mushrooms and fungi. At most, I think it gets a head nod towards the mycorrhizal fungi that live in symbiosis with the plants and help bring nutrients into the roots. But so too, I'm discovering, is there an entire world of fungus that can help your compost get hotter or metabolize things faster, or things that will grow with your trees to make them stronger. There is an entire world of these decomposers that's been sort of swept under the rug of modern chemical agriculture. And I think, like many of the things that have been hidden away, that's because it actually has great promise. Much like cannabis has immense medical applications, but was swept under the rug so that we could roll out the Rockefeller allopathic petroleum-based poison machine. And so looking under these rocks often actually unveils something that I think is going to be key to us here.
And I could go on something there as well. No, go ahead, Diamond.
I'd love to touch on the fungus. It's going to be key going into low light situations like the next few decades, because the funguses that grow, some of them require light, like the oyster mushroom, but many of the funguses that grow in low light conditions or no light, sun, actually contain the nutrients that are necessary and that we get during high light, like vitamin D, which you can get from milk or from sun. But if there's no sun, you can get vitamin D from mushrooms. And mushrooms are one of the wild edibles. You should also look for wild mushroom collecting groups in your area, because when the sun goes away and it's cloudy, we're going to have a lot of mushrooms. So it's key that you know your mushrooms so that you can have a good time as well as a good meal. There are a lot of things that mushrooms can do for you spiritually as well as your health. So mushrooms should never be overlooked, especially the mycorrhiza. They're key for all organic gardening, for good yields. Mycorrhiza are the ones that exchange the nutrients at the root level. So you need to be growing them in your soil. It's key. So get to know your mushrooms, for goodness sakes. Back to you, Dave.
That comes down with it. The lack of nutrition on your body weakens your immune system. And they're finding correlations now with these prior grand solar minimums. The reason that diseases were so able to sweep through these cultures and societies of the time was people's immune systems were just too weak because of lack of nutrition. They might have been eating one meal a day. The food was substandard. It was basically animal food. You hear all these accounts of people trying to eat grass to stay alive. And when your body gets to a certain state of lack of nutrition, things are able to bombard you that would otherwise make you sick and just sweep through full populations. And going back to let's talk about a natural fertilizer that's available pretty much everywhere that a lot of people don't look at: algae. I mean, how many of you have driven by a lake, a pond, somewhere, a stream that has been cut off and it has its own little pocket that formed there full of algae? Algae is one of the best absolute fertilizers, and as long as it's freshwater algae, not saltwater. And it's available everywhere. It grows everywhere on the planet. There's millions of strains of algae that are growing. And they all have the same, once they decompose, they have all these micronutrients that help all these plants boost their output. They've done study after study after study. Not only does it increase biogas output by 50%, so you could have the same biogas digester and you add just a few grams of algae in there, that'll boost your output of methane. But when we look at the crops themselves, specifically apple trees, pear trees, cherry trees, they find that using algae around where the base of the leaves are coming off, the yields are just spectacularly increased. Granite dust is another thing. Granite dust is so cheap, but again, it's an integral part of remineralizing your soil. And how many people are thinking granite dust versus chemical fertilizer? Well, granite dust, A, costs less, and your outputs will absolutely be gargantuan, and it'll blow your expectations out of the water if you're using granite dust. And then root crops, Diamond, you alluded to cooler, wetter conditions, more cloudiness. Great. Root crops, they don't need sun to grow. I mean, the leaves do to grow the roots, but Root crops grow in different conditions. So what do we got? Radishes, we got sweet potatoes. What about the regular white potato that you're used to seeing? Ireland, I mean, think about the climate of Ireland. That place is always cloudy and rainy and cold and moist, but they grow potatoes. So when we start to shift, sweet potatoes have everything your body needs to stay alive and nutrient-wise. And then if you're mixing that with mushrooms and microgreens, you might need a protein source in there somewhere. And Kristen, I'll let you go on with the crickets, whatever. If you agree or disagree with the algae or the granite dust, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't disagree at all. I think the paramagnetic, the granite dust is something that's been an active area of doing some experiments over here, and absolutely seeing the better yields that result from that. And you will need, you're correct to say that we will need protein. And I wouldn't immediately from there jump to crickets, because I think there are better ways of probably better ways. So actually, let me back up and start with the crickets. The crickets are an excellent way to create protein in your closet, right? So when you are literally trying to do this without any access to land, and you rent an apartment, and this is just, you want to have some method of growing protein. And even if you're not one to be an entomologist yourself, even if you don't think you can eat that cricket, there are plenty of chickens that your chickens or your neighbor's chickens or people on Craigslist pay good money for crickets. And so actually where I'm going here is, if I step back again and think about the conversation we're trying to have and what we're trying to do with it, I want people to come away, yes, with the sense that we need to move towards self-sufficiency, but not with the idea that it's this inapproachable, unattainable goal. Crickets and, as you said, microgreens or the sprouts, these are the things that you can do wherever you are without owning any piece of land on the planet. Mushrooms, we just mentioned, are something that you can grow in a cold, dark garage. All of these things, there are markets for. And so if you find yourself in an apartment and stuck in a job and you don't think you're ever going to be able to get into a, there's just no path forward towards self-sufficiency, is the way that you can perceive that situation. And I appreciate that. I really have a lot of empathy for that. But I'm telling you, as clearly as I can directly, it is a shift in mindset that has to happen first. And when you make that adjustment, you start to use every corner that you have available. Spaces you didn't even see before become accessible, and you can use them to grow the crickets that you sell on Craigslist, and the microgreens that you sell at the farmer's market, and the mushrooms and suddenly you're making more money, or as much money as you did at your job, and you've opened up this idea of diversifying your income streams. And so I really want to emphasize here that it is always a constant. It begins with that flip, with changing your mindset and starting to take steps every day towards self-sufficiency. But these that I've enumerated, the mushrooms, the crickets, the microgreens, or even, you could buy, this is an example of a skill that would be good to have if you want to build solar rigs and get an understanding of how, a little contained system of a battery and a solar panel and a charger, and get an understanding of how that works. And then you can start building those and selling them on Craigslist as well. So there are innumerable skills that we want to possess so that we're better prepared for the future, that also have value now, and that can contribute now and immediately to your being more self-sufficient. So I just wanted to point that out. Anything to add to that, Diamond?
Yeah, I could just piggyback on that. For those of you that think you can't be a farmer either because you don't have a lot of land, even if you have a front area, there are people in the Midwest that grow exclusively in 5-gallon buckets, and they grow hundreds of pounds of crops in these 5-gallon buckets. So even if you have a porch, you can do 10 or 12 5-gallon buckets and produce hundreds of pounds of food, tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, etc. But if you want to know how to get started in your local area, open your phone book and go to your local agricultural extension office. Almost every town and city has one. They're usually affiliated with the local university, and they can supply you with all of the proven seeds from the year before at cost, basically free, including garlic, seed potatoes. In Colorado, you can get hemp seed. It's endless, but you'll never know until you contact your local ag office what they offer the general public. They even offer grants. If you have a job and want to start a farm in your yard, they'll pay for half of it. It's crazy, and you'll never find out unless you go look up your local agricultural extension. So that's a heads up.
Yeah, and you touched on hemp there. What are some other crops that are incredibly easy to grow that don't need so much pesticide or herbicide or anything if you have natural soils that are already full of life-giving bacteria? What about sorghum? Sorghum you can use to produce sugar. The stalks from sorghum, you could harvest the heads, which is a grain crop, incredibly nutritious. So many of the things that our body needs. And I don't know why sorghum isn't sold more generally across the planet. We're always focused on wheat or soybeans or corn, but sorghum is incredibly nutritious. And then if you do cut that stalk and you squeeze out with rollers the water and you boil that down, you get sugar. I didn't know if you knew that, but beetroots are the same way. Sugar beets. They don't call them sugar beets for no reason. Out here in Asia, once they boil that down, they sell it in a compressed brick. It's very dark brown, and that's sugar that comes from the beet plants. I mean, there's all these byproducts from what we could traditionally grow. Sorghum's incredibly nutritious, and then hemp as well. We've been dissuaded. Oh, marijuana madness, reefer madness. And then it's been illegal for so long because of the chemical companies, the cotton industry or whatever has lobbied our Congress in the United States to keep this type of plant away from us because of the fiber industry, these types of plant fibers. Then you suddenly have a fiber source and building materials as well.
Let me interrupt on the sorghum.
Please.
I just want to interrupt real quick. The sorghum, the reason we don't sell that worldwide is because it doesn't require a chemical input. Sorghum can be grown in soil that has no nutrition, in the desert, on sand. It takes nitrogen from the air. It's an ancient grain that does not require a chemical company to supply you with a fertilizer. So they'll never grow it on a large scale because it won't feed the beast. But sorghum is the future because it doesn't require any nutrition. You can grow it in all your wastelands. Let's get to hemp. Hemp is illegal because hemp actually improves the soil. It is the #1 nitrogen fixing plant on the planet. If we used hemp in between our rows of corn and etc., we would never need a fertilizer input. So the multinational corporations are preventing ancient grains from keeping us healthy and out of the hospital. It's a system to kill us, and it must end, and it's going to end naturally. So plant sorghum, plant hemp. It is your medicine. It is your fiber. It is your nitrogen fixer. Sorghum will grow everywhere where you don't farm your actual fruit crops, and you'll have free grain. These are things you need to learn as we move forward. And the general public has been hidden from this information, which is why we're having this radio program. So sorghum is the key to the future. One single stalk can create up to 3 pounds of grain and 3 pounds of sugar cane per stalk. Each stalk can be planted 1 inch apart. That is a high yield. So amaranth is another thing you want to look into. It grows everywhere. It's a weed. There are high output amaranths. You can pop it. You can make flour with these grains. You can sprout the greens. You can feed it to your chickens, which is your protein source. It's never-ending cycle. Easy to seed save, and it will save your life. Now that's back to you, Dave.
No, Christian, I'll let you go with that. I know you have a few thoughts on, so I'd like to hear your thoughts as well on what you have with these particular crops, amaranth, sorghum, millet, these types of things.
Yeah, well, I definitely know that amaranth and quinoa are two that I was looking at as like grains that are sort of the healthier grains that would be two that are interesting to take forward. And then one that we're obliged to add to this list is the potato and the sweet potato, right? Which are just, in terms of calorie crop, I think it's hard to beat. And that is reflected when you look back at even the earliest agriculture. I found some studies about early agriculture and sort of the way that it started. And a lot of it was with these wild potatoes that were brought under control and then made to reproduce year after year, right? Because they had so many calories that they keep well. And so I think calling out the sweet potato and a potato are an obvious addition to that list. I do wonder if we need to talk about structures. We mentioned that there was that you have a structure that's going to be completely decimated by your by your basketball-sized hail, and so maybe it's not worth thinking too heavily or over-investing in a structure. But I do think it's worth, because we're so used to the terribly constructed wood frame things here in the West, at least, just reminding ourselves that there are alternative building methods that have been largely forgotten because of building codes across the country and the world now. But like Adobe and some of these, the earthen ships, the earth berm houses, and then especially, the earth ships, which are made from the recycled materials, for one, and for another, incorporate all of these concepts of sort of a living building, which ties back into the permaculture concepts that we were describing. How do you build something that you're going to live in that works in the same way as nature? And I think this is really an area where there's a lot of work yet to be done, because when you start exercising skills like aquaponics, and you really have a feel for, okay, if I have a pipe of aquaponic water, then basically wherever I drill a hole in it and put a seed in there, there's going to be a plant popping out. And so when you start to integrate that kind of thinking with a different way of approaching the structures we want to live in, then you can actually conceive of a house that's built partially into a hill, so it's going to have a high thermal mass and retain heat, which is good for all the reasons we know, and also could have this literally an integrated aquaponic system where nutrient-rich water flows through the house. As long as you've got a pump somewhere to lift that water up and power the whole thing, then you could conceivably have your greenhouse or your house with this integrated, irrigated system. And I think some really interesting designs open themselves up there. And I'm really curious, because I know Diamond has plans for an earthship there on his ranch, to hear how that strikes your mind.
Diamond?
Well, let's just say that earthships are great, but integrated earthship style structures when you add layers like earth tubes where you can store heat, geothermal, now we're talking about permaculture principles in a living structure. And Christian hit the nail on the head. There has been not enough work done on this, and I think that is the key to the future. Working on these super energy efficient homes that store all the latent heat for later use, using phase change salt materials called eutectic salts that are very inexpensive. The problem is no one can make money on these things. But in the future, I don't think making money is going to be much of an issue, as opposed to innovation for survival. So permaculture principles in building, and you really can't learn about it unless you get your hands on it, which is why I suggest people go maybe to an earthship clinic or something, except they cost money. There's lots of free places you can go, which is why I suggest you get involved with the Worldwide Organization of Farms, because you can go to farms all over the world making these type of earth-style buildings, earth bags, walapinis, dug-ins, things like that. But one thing I wanted to touch on the low light growing research, which could be the key to survival for nutrients, is arugula, because it grows in very low light and very healthy. So as far as a green that you would want to have some seed saved for the future, I think arugula is a good thing to stockpile, because it grows in low light. You can grow it in between your potatoes, your parsnips, your roots, and you can constantly be eating it as it grows. It bolts easy. It makes a lot of seeds. You just keep one sprout up, and it'll give you about 30 or 40 seeds per plant. And it's a great low light green, and it only takes 28 days to mature. So you can have a crop every month. You could plant it every week and have a weekly crop. You could actually live on it like a lettuce. So there's a heads up there.
And then, we should.
Oh, go ahead, Christian.
I was remembering that you had asked what else should we add to that list. And I think, that I love arugula for one, but the beet crops, or the root crops where you've got beets or radishes, so you're churning out edible greens on top, which is awesome. And then at the end of your harvest, you've got this root, this tuber that's going to store very well. So I think those are like good candidates for sort of getting two for the price of one there. Go ahead though, David.
Yeah, when we talk about sweet potatoes too, even if you're talking about half an acre, you're talking hundreds of pounds, if not near a ton of yield off of those, depending on how you farm it out. But even if you were to just literally all you have to do is take your sweet potato that you could buy in the store, cut off the bottom there, invert it in a jar of water, and then the new plants will come off, the eyes will grow out, and then if you cut out that eye, then you can go plant that in the ground. Now, if you just go ahead and use one sweet potato, you could probably grow 50 plants out of that, but the yield coming off is stupendous. You're really going to get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of something, not ounces on lettuce, but pounds, enough for, a lot of people to eat. And that sweet potato is so nutritious. But I want to come back to, to power these systems, they require pumps, they require electricity to have the lights. And if we're indoor with our different type of CFLs or LED grow lights, I want to touch on something that is quite an easy solution for a power supply if you have a running creek or stream near your home. Now, I'm not talking about, huge rivers like the Mississippi. This would have to be an off branch and something that's a little bit, say a couple feet wide, 2, 3, 4 feet wide. Gravitational vortex power. It's shortly known as GVP. And this was innovated by Zoltlotter out of Germany. And then if we go back to Schauberger's research back in the 1920s, it's about using the vortex in water to generate power. So it's super incredibly easy to set up. You bring your stream flow into a tank. And when I'm talking about a tank, I'm talking about those concrete, large pipes that you see them installing underground that could be 4 feet across, looking for 5 feet across. But you see these routinely used in utility across all of our cities. And you've seen these building sites. They're mainly used for wastewater going out from the drains into a larger catchment basin or another washout shed there. Those pipes are exactly what you're looking for, about 4 feet across. And all you do is you create an inlet that comes in that spins the water like you would do when you're taking a bath. We're all familiar with taking a bath. At the end, when that water gets kind of low, it starts to do that vortex like a whirlpool just as the water gets low enough. Now, you can replicate that same whirlpool effect with the water coming off of your stream. You're not damming it. You're using the water for a second or two as it spins through that basin and then exits out the bottom. Once you get that spinning effect going there, you can just put your generator with the rotors in there and you can spin off one as long as it's attached to an alternator with a brush into an alternator, or you can create your own power source. If you're electrical engineers, you can think up something much better. But on YouTube, there's an enormous amount of videos. On the PDF, if you go to a PDF search engine, not Google, a PDF search engine, you can find diagrams and schematics on how to build these things. As long as you have a running stream flow, it doesn't matter if your local utility goes down or you don't have access to power, you can create your own power. And when I talk about creating, it's megawatt, or not megawatts, but kilowatts of power per one of these small units. The test they did in Germany, they put out 46,000 kilowatts out of this thing for a year on just a little 4 foot wide pipe that they'd recreated this vortex in and then put a generator inside there. There's different designs for the blade specifications, and they've come up with 3rd generation now. There's an enormous amount of information, but this is a way forward to think about constant electrical supply because there's constant stream flow in places. And this will be able to, drive all of these other mechanisms in what you need for your biodomes, your house, your aquaponics, or anything else. If you just need, how about water for if you're going to grow outdoor or garden? Are you going to carry buckets of water? No, you want something that pumps water so you don't have to go get buckets of water. I'll leave it on that.
Yeah, really good points. And I know the wood gasifier is another thing that's been called out as a sort of an alternative generation method. And these are worth exploring, but I also, I sort of come back to, it feels like the more we use technology, it just sort of pushes out the deadline for being able, the reckoning, right? Which is not a bad thing. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't have these solutions in place. In fact, I think we should, because they will help us soften the landing here, right? It's going to take some time to get all of our new systems spun up and producing, and the varieties of whatever you're growing to acclimate themselves to where you are. So we'll need some help in this landing, and that's perhaps where technology's role will best be suited. Gentlemen, we don't have a lot of time, but I think it's important to call out something that it's also not fun to think about, but we need to talk about it, because securing your family as there are other hungry people about is going to be difficult. And so I don't know, Diamond, where would you start that?
Well, we talked about it last night, and in a quick synopsis, I would have secret caches of large amounts of my supplies hidden in a place where no one knows where they are, in a place where your family or you can get to if needed. But when you're interfacing with the government entities or those people coming to take your food, it appears as if you are showing them what you actually have. So being compliant while actually hiding large stockpiles in your backyard. Now, this would have to be buried in a shipping container in a secret bunker, and you need land for that. There are other places where you can hide caches in buildings that people will never know about, so you can be creative. But having most of your important supplies, medicine, food, hidden away in a secret bunker as your main storehouse, if in fact you are staying in place. And that would be the only way to survive. You also need security. I mean, we have millions of bullets and guns, and you have to know how to use them safely, because you don't know how it's going to go down. And I think we need a whole nother show on really talking about the solutions, because as far as energy, we should be talking about multiple ways: biodigesters, diesel generators, gasifiers, microhydro, solar. All those options should be around, because you never know what you may need. But that would only be in the circumstance where you have a homestead or a place where you can prepare to stay in place. So I'll pass it back to you, Dave.
Well, I'll just touch on the point that is going to be a main concern, because through every grand solar minimum, one thing that always comes up along with the crop losses is massive population migration. When you look up into the Scandinavian countries, after the Maunder minimum, Wolf minimum, my mistake there, after the Wolf minimum, they had their cities that emptied out 90% of the residents left to go elsewhere. Now, when we start to get power grids going down, the power grids were stretched this year in the Northeast U.S. If it happens again next winter, and if the power cuts during a winter storm, even the Southeast U.S., all-time record high usage, down in Texas as well, the grids are being stretched at the moment. So once the grids start to fail during the wintertime and people realize that this is no longer viable to live up in these northern latitudes, there's going to be huge population migration. And I don't know in the beginning if it'll be marauding hordes, but going forward 5-6 years from now, it absolutely will be, as people try to migrate and just get out while they can, because the traditional systems that we rely on for delivery of water, food, electricity, medicine, that's all going to have real hiccups in it. So population migration is another thing to think about, and the countries will not be welcoming. I don't care if you have a retirement fund and you try to move down to Indonesia or Myanmar or whatever equatorial country. At some point, they're going to get full and say, no more. And also, all of you others, just get out now. So the borders are going to be closed eventually as well. They're just not going to let all these 8 billion people migrate around. We have so many resources and so much wealth on the planet. Anybody can move anywhere pretty much. It's just not going to be allowed to happen. That's one thing. Again, mind frame change, that there are going to be people moving all around you. And how are you going to deal with it?
I just want to, it's a big question and an important one. As we approach the top of the hour here, I just wanted to thank you again, David, for hosting this. It's been I've really enjoyed the conversation, and I think it's been a fruitful one. And I also wanted to mention, I think drawing on the emphasis on community here. Community is everything, and we're all in this together. And I just want to point out that there is a wiki.iceagefarmer.com that I've set up and that anyone can add to. And so it's growing, and I really hope people check that out. There's some increasing number of resources on there that are useful. And I think as more people find it and contribute to it, it could become a really an ultimately useful thing. We've talked, just in closing, about some pretty heavy stuff tonight. And if I take a step back, I want to recognize that, because I know that for folks who are coming to this for the first time, it's really hard to swallow, and it's even more difficult to integrate that and to move forward in life. Wake up tomorrow morning and where do I go from here? How do I live in two worlds? Because I have to keep existing here, and I'm resource constrained, so I have to keep my job, but also I know I have to be preparing for the future. And I'm reminded of a quote from Albert Camus, who spoke of the bleak sterility of life lived without illusions. And that is, I would suggest, where we're getting when we look around at what's going on and we really take this to heart, that these changes are happening without illusions. It looks pretty bleak out here. And it's hard to accept that reality into our own psyche. There's grief associated with it. There's, one really has to be mindful of your own psyche when you take this information in. But another quote from Camus that I want to offer to balance that is this. He said, "In the midst of winter, I found there was within me an invincible summer." And so my challenge to you tonight is, don't just let this information wash over you. Reach inside and find that invincible summer, and then start building a new, more resilient future right now. Diamond, I'd love to hear your closing thoughts.
Yeah, well, amen to everything you said, Christian. I think we really need a public interface where we can get deeper into these topics. And I reached out to Revolution Radio to take the Wednesday night slot from 10 to 12 so we can talk about solutions moving forward on a weekly basis. We can have all the proper guests. We can talk about power systems, alternative construction, prepping, finding community in your area, things like that are important, because we're not going to be able to survive and thrive on our own. I wake up every day with a smile, and I have a whole plethora, a list of things I could do that are going to take years, and I'm alone, and I love it, because everything I do every day is a step towards self-sufficiency, and it's just going to be awesome when it's done, and I'm going to live in abundance and be completely independent because of my work, because of what I did, and I want to share that with the public. There's a lot to be learned, and I had a great talk. This was a great conversation, guys. We should do it again. Back to you, Dave.
So I'm going to leave. Everybody knows that you can find my work on Adapt 2030 channel on YouTube, as well as Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast that I'm restarting again, and also oilseedcrops.org. That is my website where I try to put all the resources. I have a full list of about 100 links and resources. Now, Christian, Diamond, how can people find you on the net? What resources do you have? Do you have a website? Tell them about your YouTube channel and how can they find more information about you or contact you?
I would go first. Yeah, Ice Age Farmer is my channel on YouTube. And then that main resource and website is wiki.iceagefarmer.com, which is totally a collaborative effort there. And I welcome folks to email me as well. That's iceagefarmer@gmail.com.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. Yeah, we're at oppenheimerranch@gmail.com if anyone wants to get in contact with us. Our website is oppenheimerranch.org or threecanyons.org. We have a YouTube channel, Oppenheimer Ranch Project. I have Facebook pages, Plasma Geology and Solar Shutdown, where you